Greetings, friends, and welcome back. We will soon be getting back to our series It's What He Would Have Wanted, but in my last video I mentioned the mysterious fourth voice, so I thought we'd take a brief look at that first. There's been so little written about the fourth voice that I thought I'd just read it all out, starting with Emma Calvé's autobiography. Calvé was a great singer of the late 19th century. She had a lot going for her. She had a beautiful voice with an extraordinary range, and she was also an excellent actress. She was very beautiful, and she must have been a good dancer as well. But there was something else she had which no one could compete with, and this is the story of how she acquired it. The scene is Rome, and the year is 1891. During my sojourn in the Holy City, I often went to hear the choir of the Sistine Chapel, which was at that time under the direction of the last of the eunuchs, Mustafa, a Turk, like all his companions. He had an exquisite high tenor voice, truly angelic, neither masculine nor yet feminine in type, deep, subtle, poignant in its vibrant intensity. He sang the classic church music admirably, especially Palestrina. He had certain curious notes, which he called his fourth voice, strange, sexless tones, superhuman, uncanny. I was so much impressed by his talent that I decided to take some lessons from him. The first question I asked was how I might learn to sing those heavenly tones. "It's quite easy," he answered. "You have only to practice with your mouth tight shut for 2 hours a day. At the end of 10 years, you may possibly be able to do something with them." That was hardly encouraging. "1,000 thanks," I exclaimed. "At that rate, I will never learn. It takes too much patience." Nevertheless, with the tenacity which is a fundamental part of my character, I set to work. My first efforts were pitiful. My mother assured me that they sounded like the mewling of a sick cat. At the end of 2 years, however, I began to make use of my newly acquired skill. But it was not until the 3rd year of study that I obtained a complete mastery of the difficult art. These special notes, which I have used since then with great success, are rarely found in the ordinary run of voices. I have tried repeatedly to develop them in my pupils, but in spite of hard work and close application, I have never found one pupil who has been able to imitate them. While I was studying in Rome, I overheard one of my comrades remark that, after all, this fourth voice was nothing but a trick. Much vexed, I told Mustafa what had been said. "Let them howl," he answered. "Our friends call our achievement trickery when they cannot do the same thing themselves. As soon as they have learned the art, they call it talent." Now, it has long been believed that there is just one recorded example of Calvé's fourth voice, 2 notes in a French folk song. So let's listen to that. I ran this recording through a spectrum analyzer, so what we can see here are the frequencies of Emma Calvé's voice and the accompanying piano. The purple represents the low intensity frequencies, so we've got here the hiss that you can get on some old records, and then the pink are getting more intense, with finally the yellow being the most intense frequencies. And we can see here all these yellow lines and pink lines that are the overtones and the harmonics in Calvé's voice. But watch what happens when we get to that eerie note in her fourth voice. Did you notice how almost all the frequencies disappeared on that one note? It's like she was singing a pure sine wave, which is almost incredible. Some voices have more harmonics and overtones than others, but for a voice to have none is unheard of, and possibly being able to do that would create this distant, echo-like effect. Now, as I said before, that is generally considered to be the only existing record of Calvé's fourth voice. But once you know what you're listening for, you'll actually be able to hear that she uses it on other records too. For example, this charming song, which has an extended cadenza with flute, and she sings all the highest notes in her fourth voice. It might be that she found it easier and less fatiguing than carrying up the head voice to those highest notes. She wasn't a young woman when she made this recording, and as Agnes Larkham told us in our previous video on registers, the head voice is usually the first to go, but maybe the fourth voice doesn't die as quickly, so maybe Calvé was finding it easier to just access the fourth voice rather than carrying up the head voice. But it could also be that she was going for the effect, that haunting echo-like effect, because she also carries down the fourth voice onto the final note. And we can see on our spectrogram that the flute actually has more harmonics and overtones than she does. For comparison, here are the same notes sung by a different singer in normal head voice. Amelita Galli-Curci had a lighter voice than Calvé's. If we're talking about the colours of voices, hers was fairly white, which means it didn't have very many overtones or harmonics, but still you can see that her high head notes have a lot more frequencies in them than Calvé's fourth voice notes. So that's Emma Calvé's fourth voice, but she wasn't the only person to write about it. Isaac Nathan, who was an early 19th century singer, composer and impresario, wrote a big book on music and singing in 1823. He wrote about the 3 vocal registers, and he went on, "There is a 4th kind of voice, which is but little appreciated, consequently rarely cultivated, and since I cannot trace any sponsors, either among the Italian or English, who have given a name to this peculiar style, I shall call it the feigned. I am aware that the falsetto is considered a feigned voice, and certainly that voice must be feigned which is produced by artificial constraint, and that does not consequently seem to come forth naturally from the chest. But the quality of the sound that I allude to is not that which is produced in the throat and already distinguished under the name of falsetto, nor is it the voce di testa. It is a species of ventriloquism, a soft and distant sound produced apparently in the chest, and chiefly in the back of the throat and head, an inward and suppressed quality of tone that conveys the illusion of being heard at a distance. It is as a sweet and soft melodious sound wafted from afar, like unto the magic spell of an echo." Mr. Braham is the only public singer I ever heard who has availed himself of the proper advantages which the feigned voice affords. Those who have listened to his singing of the Echo Song from Lorenski must recollect the enchantingly pleasing effect which he gave to the farewell supposed to come from his father. And now he includes a little footnote. This kind of voice is in common use with the Hebrews, and is termed by them the voice of a child. I am decidedly of opinion that it is partly in consequence of their cultivating this particular tone that they possess that peculiar sweetness of voice that has ever distinguished them from other singers. This footnote is particularly important because I've come across something that seems quite similar in the autobiography of Rosa Poncell. She was writing about Enrico Caruso, who also sang with Emma Calvé in his earlier days, and who was a big fan of a certain cantor who he would always go to hear whenever he was singing in town. This is what Poncell said. "Caruso was an interesting study at rehearsals. He was always punctual and only did a few vocalises to warm up his voice. To conserve his resources, unless it was a dress rehearsal, he would sing in half voice, occasionally showing off his full volume if he felt disposed to. During most of the rehearsals, he would sing high notes in a cantor-like falsetto, an eerie sound compared to what his voice sounded like at full volume." Now, I've found a recording of Caruso where he uses this particular tone. It is, I would describe it as eerie and distant like an echo. And it doesn't sound like a usual falsetto at all. I wonder if that's what Poncell was talking about and possibly what Nathan was talking about. Let's have a listen to Caruso's 4th voice. Again, let's compare this to a more typical falsetto from a tenor. Unfortunately, this record is louder than the others, so we're seeing a bit of a wall of colour. But you can still pick out quite clearly the yellow lines over the orange and pink. And we can see just how many overtones this tenor has, who was coincidentally also a cantor. So that's all I've got. I said there wasn't much. Just a few notes of this possible extra register that some people can access and others don't seem to have in their voices at all. But do you think that we could rediscover and revive this mysterious fourth voice? Do you think we'll ever again hear the likes of 10 years, Mustafa said. I'll keep working at it. By the way, my apologies to any colourblind viewers. I didn't design this spectrum analyzer, so I can't do anything about the colours, but I hope you'll still be able to see the bright lines over the top of the darker smudges. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next seance with the Phantoms of the Opera.